afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast, State of the Balance with me, your host, Imperial Dane, the only sanctioned source of, well, such commentary, and of course, your master of propaganda. So, we've certainly had the World Tournament over, World Cup, whatever, you know. Loveness was the winner, and that's only given us maybe some bit more insights into, shall we say, the state of the meta as well there. In particular, what classes or factions are perceived as the strongest. And I mean, so looking at that one, like, overall the most played two armies were the Soviets and the Oberkommando West. There was a bit of American things sort of roughly that, and then you sort of had a bit of Wehrmacht, and finally we had, I think, no British at all, so that should at least give us some indicator where things are lying. So, let's start, of course, with the usual order of allies into Axis, starting with the Soviets, who are pretty much like, you know, was the most, I think, overrepresented their faction, and they're also getting very popular in 1 vs 1, 2 vs 2s, and overall they're just very potent. Like, they've increasingly just been pushed, so they have good early game, mid game, and late game, which is not really how the initial design of the faction of the design was. So I feel like, you know, they might want to tone something down there. Like, they got strong conscripts, then now with, you know, the upgrade there can easily scale into the late game. They got powerful anti-tank guns, which, you know, almost perform like a Pack 40, except they also have a 6-man crew. Artillery, you got the T-7, which is just a really good early mid-game unit. They can sort of swing things hard about. You got the IS-2, which is basically a cheaper and better King Tiger for the most part. So, you know, they just got a lot of the elements that just make them very powerful. Penals, of course, are also very potent. And, of course, they also are quite flexible with the anti-tank rifles and the anti-tank satchel charges. Like, they just sort of pushed a lot of the Soviets to increasing the point. I feel like there's not really any actual weaknesses, which in particular becomes apparent in, say, 2 vs 2 matchups, where like you get into a late game situation with the Soviets, they'll just crush you because they just have all the firepower, and you don't. And particularly becomes apparent as the Wehrmacht. So I mean, in that sense, I'd probably argue that the issue is basically at some point they just pushed them too far, and they need to, like, basically be toned down, obviously. So the question is, of course, how do we tone them down? I mean, probably one bit, again, would just be maybe looking into the field gun, you know, maybe less penetration, smaller crew, slower rate of fire, like just something so it isn't like, you know, overperforming compared to any other anti-tank gun. Because, again, like, while it may not have the best penetration or rate of fire, it still has, like, you know, big crew, and it doubles as pretty efficient artillery, which just makes it in very efficient packaging. But once it's eventually free, it becomes ridiculously potent. It is also very difficult to kill due to that 6 crew. So again, something could be done to maybe turn it down in some way. That probably sort of one thing, and maybe also tone down that 7-man upgrade for the conscripts in one way or the other. Again, while people aren't rushing towards it, which at least been indicating it's not that powerful, it does seem to be, shall we say, a bit heavily represented. So that might be something there to look into, or maybe just turning down some part of the mechanized armor company, or maybe even just looking a bit toning down the IS-2. I mean, there's definitely something that needs to be toned down. Again, my personal guess would be the field gun or the 7-man upgrade, as those are essentially the ones that increasingly stand out in my perspective, or the T-70, which is also quite really good. I mean, it's basically pushing out everything, because why go for an anti-aircraft after when you go for the T-70? Why go for an F-6? Because most of the time you got the T-7, then you got the Issue-5. Like, it's sort of, I feel like, pushing out a lot of other things, and it's also kind of just making mechanized, or the 10% command, just, you know, the T-70 pit start while everything else isn't working. Of course, I could buff that more. I feel like they just, you know, make the Soviets even stronger, and do we really need that in that sense? I mean, if they do that, again, something has to give elsewhere, I mean. So again, like, there might be something that can be buffed, but it definitely has to come at the expense of nerfing some of the units that overperform, which again will be something like the T-70, this is 3, and maybe that conscript 7 upgrade. So that's sort of my thoughts there on the Soviets. Obviously, again, will probably, you know, considered deeply provocative and whatnot to a certain subset of players. But, you know, unless I go, you know, praise Comrade Stalin, Soviet Union for 1,000 years, they're never going to be satisfied anyways. Moving on to the Americans, they saw a recent amount of play, but again, they weren't played as much as the Soviets, in particular in the finals. There were no USF at all either, for example. So, I mean, I think they're in a pretty good spot. It's just when you compare them with the Soviets again just have everything covered, while the Americans are powerful and they can sort of snowball very hard. I mean, unlike, again, the Soviets, you know, they do sort of stick to that, you know, weakness that their late game isn't where they are particularly amazing, whereas with the Soviets, they kind of are. So, I think the Americans in that sense are in a pretty good spot. I mean, the Americans might still feel a bit overtuned, but as long as they don't go, you know, buffing more of the American late game all of a sudden, I think it should be fine. Like, there's a good American diversity and strategy. You know, you got sort of all sorts of doctrines. You got the ones with Pathfinders. You got heavy cavalry. You got mechanized. Like, there's, you know, a good pick there, sort of what gets chosen amongst the American players. I think they're in a good spot. And then finally got the British, which just didn't perform at all at the tournament. Obviously, there's some issues. The problem, I think, in the large part is with the British is it's basically an issue of design. Basically, they're sort of meant to be this gimmick faction. They sort of have like some big weaknesses, but then compensate by stuff being stronger. Like, they got these weird emplacements. The problem is, it's just not very satisfying design. It's not very good design. It just creates these issues because the faction obviously cannot, shall I say, compete with the others in most cases without something being rather busted. As soon as you remove that busted element, the rest of the faction stops working. Again, it's the problem in the design, and it's a bit difficult for them to, you know, fix it because they have to, you know, remove units and add units. Like, at best, I could maybe suggest, you know, adding a mortar half track. You know, they get some moving artillery that can sort of help fix things, but it's not just another mortar, which doesn't even say immediately also put the mortar emplacement out of business, but they get some artillery that's, you know, a bit cheaper, lighter. Also, it costs fuel, so there maybe actually be an offset there rather than just, you know, going from mortars and ACs and all that and just, you know, pushing everything else over. I'd probably also recommend looking into the Universal Carrier, which I think A is overperforming the light early game because, again, it's effectively a light tank, but the problem is it also just gets completely pointless by the mid to late game. Like, it just stops doing anything. So my suggestion would be there to actually give it some abilities, you know, as you tag up. It unlocks more things it can do that has more utility. Maybe, like, you know, once you get to the company command post, it can mark targets. And, you know, depending on what specialty you unlock, you know, a bit like, you know, shows say the Schwimmwagen and Kuberwagen, whatever they're back in from companies running the Panzer Elite, you can maybe sort of unlock like a special extra ability for the Universal Carrier. I think that could work towards, shall we say, making the British work a bit better by, you know, shall we say, having anvil and hammer tactics unlock more, I think, useful things. In particular, I feel like hammer tactics really doesn't do a lot, and probably some of those abilities need to be revised. And even anvil tactics probably need some revision in those abilities. I think they need to be more impactful for them to be really worth it, because they're sort of like the Wehrmacht T4 in theory. They offer a bit more and they're a bit more easily accessible, but even at the same time, a lot of those passive abilities don't really offer anything. So I think they need to look into making hammer and anvil upgrades better by actually unlocking, you know, more useful abilities for more units rather than just, you know, a few. And also just giving the Universal Carrier more utility. It probably has been nerfed a bit to compensate because, again, it's kind of dumb in the early game. Make it less bulletproof. Kindly, Relic. Just less bulletproof. I think that make the rest of it work. And just, you know, add some more abilities to it. I think that would give the British a bit more to work with in a longer game and sort of make them feel a bit better, because the overall issue with the British is they're just not very flexible, which means either they completely dumpster you because, again, they just get everything to work, or you dumpster them. They're like just very much high variance in a sense because the faction lacks a lot of tools, which means the faction is either really frustrating to play against or frustrating to play as, which is also, I think, is one of the reasons why I didn't see a lot of play there in the tournament. Like, it's just not very good. Also, fix the Vickers, make it more mobile. Same with MD42, make it more mobile. I think they also do more there for the Wehrmacht. So we on to the Oberkommand West. Very, again, much the almighty German faction that keeps appearing. Again, I feel like the Volksgunners need to be toned down a bit, though again, I mean, they need to tone down some Allied infantry because they keep balancing everything against the Volksgrenadiers, which is obviously a bit of a problem. Sturmpioneers seem fine. I think the overall issue right now with the Oberkommand is actually the Puma. A lot of strategies are now increasingly turning into, you know, Luke's Puma stole into Tiger. Where did you see that before? Oh, right, Luke's Puma stole into Command Panther. Like, the issue in this point, I think, is the Puma. It needs lower penetration. It's just too good at taking on medium armaments, kiting about. It doesn't even have to kite them, in fact. It just sort of, you know, doesn't even like maneuver, just stays to the range, just shoots, and, you know, I think it's just too easy to deal with and stall with the Puma. Like, lower the penetration access to flank. It has to get close. It has to get a bit more dangerous for the Puma, because right now I think it's just too easy to get a Puma and then stall. It's just too efficient. So lowering the penetration of the Puma by, I don't know, 20 points to make it a bit less efficient to take on medium tanks head on, I think would do a lot there to, say, diversify the Oberkommand West meta. Another option which I've heard is maybe switch out with the Lukes and the flak half track, but I don't really feel like that fixes a ton. It might make Battle Group Headquarters more reliable, but again, you just get flak half tracks into Puma, at which point I feel like you haven't really fixed a lot, since again, the issue is going to still be the Puma. So I feel like they need to nerf the Puma. Also, probably buff the King Tiger still. It's just not very good. I mean, the problem is with a lot of the increasingly German late game units, unless the Tiger 1, they just hit too late and they're not, either too expensive and they're not very good. So that probably needs to be buffed again. Maybe give it more damage per shot, or, you know, more mobility, lower its price. But something needs to be happening to make the King Tiger a bit more attractive than it currently is. So that, I think, sort of covers the Oberkommando West. Finally, we got the Wehrmacht. It's sort of little usage in the tournament. For example, you know, Nagano brought it there and lost with it. Part of it is because he played too conservatively. But, I mean, the overall issue is there's not really a lot of confidence there. Obviously, it's the Wehrmacht. Again, the issue I still feel like pay 8. The MG42 is just too sluggish. Like, again, Nagano, for example, didn't bother with it, which actually cost him a lot because he actually needed to ensure you don't bleed out of manpower. But it's just, you know, it can be really difficult to keep maneuvering because, again, it's so slow. It's supposed to be a core element of the Wehrmacht, but it's just too slow, so most players don't bother with it. Like, it just requires, for a lot of players, too much micromanagement to just, you know, be effective, and it's usually dealt with and stolen. So I feel like it needs to be made a bit more mobile, like, you know, so you can just sort of slightly shift better to threats and also keep up the advances a bit better. There's an increasingly large amount of allied counters to it, so I don't know why they don't allow it to be more mobile. Again, it's similar to the Vickers. Make the bloody machine gun faster. You can give the Serbs apparently fast machine guns and the Americans fast machine guns, but the defensive factions, yeah, right, fix it, really. I mean, that really at this point shouldn't be too difficult. Otherwise, the main issue still remains, I think, for the Wehrmacht. Tier 4 isn't very good. It needs more to do. Again, add Knights Cross holders or add some upgrade for the Panzer Grenadiers. Maybe add some more rule generic upgrades there. Buff the Panther. I'd suggest giving it 200 damage. Easy peasy. Give the Sturmpanzer 4 bigger AoE or more damage. And you know, the Panzerwerfer just give it more AoE per rocket. Like, it's just too inaccurate a lot of the time. And it just ends up being, you know, I mean, it costs the same as Katyusha, but it hits later and it's worse than Katyusha. Like, again, not rocket science. That should be fixed. Buff it. I mean, make it good. It's a tier 4 unit. It's much more difficult to do, but somehow it doesn't perform at all like a tier 4 unit. So I would say that's probably where the issue is there as well for the Wehrmacht tier 4. But again, others ways could be to look into maybe like separating the armored skirts upgrades for, say, a lot of the units, make it a separate upgrade, so you have to pay a bit more per tank, but at the same time you then get the armor. They can also free up the Veteran 2, though of course that means the Panzer from Algier doesn't make sense for the Wehrmacht strategic reserves, but I don't know. That could be looked into as well. Or maybe sort of replace the Panzer from Algier with something else, maybe a Jagdpanzer, I don't know. But that could also be, you know, a way to maybe do something about it. Also buff the Stu's armor. Like, Veteran 2 doesn't really matter at the moment, just make it better. And, you know, maybe replace the Tiger Ace with the King Tiger. Like, the Tiger Ace just feels like a weird relic that doesn't, you know, quite make sense. Most people are going to go for Tigers anyways. For the Tiger Ace, it's still just too expensive. So replace it with a King Tiger and, of course, buff the King Tiger. You get a bit more fun for the Wehrmacht that way as well. And, you know, you might actually make the King Tiger, you know, worthwhile. So I think that could sort of be an idea to look into. But, yeah, overall, Wehrmacht tier 4 needs to be fixed. Vickers MU42 need to be made more mobile so they can sort of do more. So I think that sort of roughly covers the state of the balance here. Again, Soviets very much feel like the best faction at the moment, with the Brits and the Wehrmacht sort of hanging between. The Oberkommanders and the Americans, I think, sort of, you know, being good. The Oberkommanders a bit too good due to the Puma, but, you know, at least it's not the Soviets. So that sort of is my perspective on the matches. And of course, I'm sure there'll be plenty of disagreement, but that's, you know, inevitable on the internet. So that sort of is here, the state of the balance. Hope you liked this video. If you did, subscribe, like, share, comment, press the bell button. And of course, if you like what I do and wish to support, you can consider donating or pledging on Patreon. Links in the video description, and, you know, allows me to keep doing this videos day after day, so do consider chipping in a bit there. This is Imperial Links and cheers, and thank you all for watching. Bye.